I'm Peter Morrison, and I have a movement disorder in Tourette syndrome. Tourette syndrome causes both motor and vocal tics. Tics are movement disorders. That goes like that. My name is Pete Morrison. I'm 38 years old. I was born and raised in the United States in a suburb called Pittsford, New York, outside of Rochester, New York. Favorite things love growing up to do are sports. I'm a huge soccer fan and baseball fan. Barcelona is my favorite team. And also have a family with a wife, Jessica Morrison. She's actually a pediatrician as well. We have two beautiful kids, both are redheads. And actually my son, who's only 6.5, also has Tourette syndrome. When I was young, though, I started to develop some involuntary movements, and a lot of what it was in the beginning I actually recall from my parents. One day I was just sitting on my dad's lap, and he noticed that I was having some kind of body movements and facial movements, and he thought that was a little bit strange. So kind of just watched it for a while, but really what I remember it coming to the front is I was playing soccer one day, and my coach was very regimented on the line, you know, things like that, and he would look at me and he'd say, "Morrison, stop making faces." And that's kind of when I realized that something was different about me. You know, my parents were very proactive in terms of trying to figure out what was going on. They knew that this wasn't quote-unquote normal. And so they honestly had me immediately evaluated by the pediatrician who, you know, like most were like, well, these are just things that kids do, you know, it's normal, they'll probably go away. So, you know, initially we just monitored it, I think for probably a couple months to a year, but then they started to get even more notable. And so my parents, you know, I guess were more concerned about how it was going to impact me day to day, so they really pushed to see a neurologist to try to get an answer. You know, what I would say is getting the diagnosis of having Tourette syndrome really was the key in just understanding what that was, and especially for my parents. And then my parents knew the tools to kind of give me, and whether that was with counseling and therapy, whether that was going to be with medication, really education and just having the diagnosis and kind of giving me a roadmap of what was going to happen, that maybe they come and go, they get a little bit worse, but in the end, a lot of times they improve. And so that's kind of what I saw over time, which we can get to. And again, it's not to reverse symptoms, it's to control symptoms to improve my quality of life. And that's what I have found over time with medication and non-medication approaches for me. I'm an open book, I'm very transparent, and a lot of people know that about me, and it was the comorbidities, you know, of having ADHD, some anxiety, and OCD. And really those kind of came to the forefront after the diagnoses. And so I think that was also important that my parents kind of kept on with the pediatrician and the neurologist to make sure that we were looking at the whole picture and we weren't just treating the movements per se, but we were treating, you know, the other things that came about. And so I really found that as I went on into middle school, into high school, that, you know, there was a little bit more anxiety, there was a little bit more OCD that needed to be addressed. And, you know, as I got older, the tics really kind of faded. As they do. I still have some, but really it was the other symptoms that we needed to make sure that we had under control, which they are. But again, if they went under the rug, I think it would have gone in a different direction. Everyone's different in terms of how much they want to reveal about themselves, right? And so you're out on a date and again, you know, you're making faces, you're making sounds, but again, you want to be yourself, right? And that's what I advocate to people, is that if someone points it out, I'm of the proponent to educate and just say, you know, these are tics, whether you want to say it's Tourette syndrome, what it may be, that these are tics, they're part of who I am, they're involuntary. And in the end, hopefully, if you're on a date, that person still wants to be there with you, right, because of who you are, and not because of the Tourette and how it could define you, which again, it shouldn't. And so I'm of the proponent to be open and upfront and to educate. But again, not everyone's like that, so it can be tricky to navigate that. But you also wouldn't be confident in yourself. And if someone, you know, let's say doesn't want to go on a date with you or continue a relationship just because of the Tourette, then really that shouldn't be the person that you're with. You know, and that's one thing that growing up that I thought about, that, you know, is this something that's hereditary? Am I going to pass it on? Because again, you know, I made it through, but I always worry about, well, you know, what if it happens to my child? You know, am I going to have the same perceptions and worries? And so my son actually does. And, you know, but in the end I think about, well, who wouldn't be a better father, I guess, than someone with Tourette to kind of help him through. And in the end, we try not to pay too much attention about it. It is who it is, or he is who he is, and it's not bothering him right now. So we're not really making a big deal about it, but also kind of just being aware of it, looking for those comorbidities, ADHD, anxiety, because again, they can sometimes be more impactful. There certainly is a great behavioral intervention called CBIT, or Comprehensive Behavioral Intervention for Tics, which really kind of allows the patient to utilize different strategies to help control their tics. And, certain bothersome ones, and I think the premise is they develop what's called competing motor responses for the specific tics. And so, again, I think in terms of treatment, you don't want to go after all your tics, right? You really want to go after the ones that are most bothersome and the most impactful, because they do ebb and flow. They do come and go, but you really want to address the ones that are most bothersome that then can improve your quality of life. And, having Tourette syndrome and a movement disorder, again, not necessarily being a degenerative, progressive process, but understanding what it's like really gave me the energy and the drive to actually become a doctor, which I am now. And I'm actually a neurologist and a movement disorder specialist. Again, it's not the same as Parkinson's and Huntington's and dystonia, but at least understanding what it's like to have involuntary movement, that there are medications to control symptoms, to improve quality of life, is really what I aim for. And that's what I try to tell back to my patient, as a patient, but also as their care provider.